Let me just say a couple of things about Mary's initial question. Is the media worse than in the past? I'm not, it's tempting to believe so. I'm not sure I'm necessarily convinced. It's possible. You know, when I think about the Sun newspaper doing headlines during the 1984 miners' strike of Arthur Scargill as Hitler with the headline "Mein Führer," or the sinking of the Argentinian ship the Belgrano when it was heading away from the Falklands, which was a war crime, and the headline on the front page of the Sun was "Gotcha," or the vicious attacks on Tony Benn. I don't know. I mean, haven't had a scientific study, so but I'm not sure. What I think is, I mean, I think it's a good question about, you know, that it's kind of shocking that Boris Johnson, you know, anything more than about 1% in the polls feels quite shocking. But I think there has been, I mean, if you think back to the early lockdown, there was quite a strong feeling of national unity. And the government's poll ratings really soared. Partly because I think it is extremely scary to think that your government does not have your best interests in heart when you're facing this deadly pandemic. And therefore there was sort of willingness to give the government the benefit of the doubt, especially it's Keir Starmer and people all kind of colluded in this narrative. I think we've progressively seen that eroded as people have discovered or had to sort of candidly face the fact that the government does not have your best interest at heart. And I think that has weakened the government. However, why are they still, you know, their poll ratings haven't completely disintegrated? I think that it's not just the power of the media. I think the utter inadequacy of the opposition, as I think Chorlton was pointing out, the parliamentary opposition, of, you know, that Starmer's criticisms are so weak, so late, that allows Johnson to taunt him over it. You know, for instance, the way Starmer's constantly put an emphasis on keeping the schools open. It's barely a different line than Johnson. Starmer sort of switches about a day before Johnson. That, I think, helps maintain the Tories' position, because the lack of effective opposition, the lack of a real fight from the trade union leadership, which would create a sense of collective empowerment and overcome that sense of powerlessness and atomization and offer a real alternative, I think also plays into the Tories' hands. Nonetheless, on issue after issue, what strikes you is the gap between what the government says and does and where the vast majority of the public mood is. And that's why, from the A-level exams to the furlough scheme to having to move to closed schools, again and again, this is not a strong government. And I think we have to emphasize that and say, and therefore, it's not good enough that we're not seeing a bigger fight back from the official leadership of either the Labour Party or the trade union leadership. And that means that other people have to organise and take initiatives. And that's why we need a much more bigger, more combative socialist organisation. It also means that with these weaknesses, the government will seek to use division, whether it's blaming individuals who go to parks, when the big problem is there are still millions of people attending for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, going on public transport, sometimes because they've got no alternative, collective workplaces, which help act as incubators and spreaders of the disease. This is the real problem. So it's individual blame game. It's the stoking up of racism. These kind of divisions we have to then push back against, because this is the oldest trick in the book. And therefore questions of solidarity and resistance of oppression, set anti-racism, but also on LGBT rights, against transphobia, on a whole, discrimination against disabled people. On all of these fronts, we have to constantly be the people who seek unity, uncompromising defence of oppression, arguments for unity, and wherever possible to mobilise forces to push back and to unite people. I think Gail's point is an incredibly important one. I think there's going to be a ramping up of austerity. I can see a swathe of cuts in local government services, for example. I think the assault on jobs, on fire and rehire, is a key battle line. And again, I think that underlines the importance of people before profit. Not that people before profit is itself big enough or has the roots just to kind of generate all the fights, but it can help give people confidence and it can help spread the word about solidarity. It can offer an alternative to the kind of social partnership agenda that crucially, as Debs was raising, to me, the question, Debs, isn't so much, you know, if Morrison's workers get a pay rise, why aren't, you know, shouldn't it be care workers? The real thing is that there are billions of pounds at the top of the society in Britain. It's vastly rich. The rich have had a decade whilst we've had pay cuts of, you know, huge kind of wealth pouring upwards in society out of our pockets, and we need that back, and that's only going to happen if we organise and if we collectively resist. Couple of points to make there. I mean, when unions fight, they grow. The National Education Union has recruited 21,000 people since the 1st of January. I mean, I think it's, what is it, the 12th, 13th of January, right? Unions that fight grow. They get new reps, they get more workplace organisation, and they get an emboldened membership, you know, in school after school, where people got together, sometimes nervously, not always easy, to sign perhaps a Section 44 letter, to sometimes in defiance of their head teacher. There's a big step. People are worried about their jobs. They're worried about their future. They came together. Some people have been nervous, perhaps didn't even do it. Other people just took that risk and were worried about, would they be victimised? Would they have their pay docked? And what happened on that Monday was they discovered that not only were they not victimised, but they forced the government to change its mind, making people feel emboldened and vindicated. And that will breathe confidence into union organisation in school after school, where people took that step. And that is something we have to, as a lesson, not just for the school unions, but across our entire trade union movement. Just to mention in passing one very small thing, perhaps just might be helpful, you know, because partly because there hasn't been the scale of resistance from the unions at the same time, and there's been a vacuum as people look around and want to fight back, and you know, sometimes some of the online tools have allowed a bit of a creative response. And some of our comrades have been involved, for example, in an initiative called the Care Workers Coronavirus Action Group, which has kept going a bit below the radar, where a little group of care workers who want to build trade union organisation, who want to fight over pay and safety and all of these kind of issues, and making sure that the care sector isn't dominated by privatisation and low pay and so on, are organising, and their confidence is growing. And just to say, we could put you in touch with that, Debs, and that might be something you want to at least, you know, find out about the meetings and perhaps get in touch with them. And I can tell Wendy after the meeting and pass on the details and so on. So we should do that. Mary's point, I think, is an interesting one, Mary. I hadn't quite thought of that, about the difference between Rolls-Royce and Optare. The only thing I would add, however, is Unite hasn't always had a great record about fighting, even over jobs. And in some ways, I would contrast what's happened at Rolls-Royce, where it does look like they are going to be able to knock back compulsory redundancies for at least 2 years and get some kind of commitment to the plant for 10 years, which is perhaps not everything, but, you know, it shows that fighting gets somewhere. With what happened at Honda in Swindon, which has been marked for closure, or Ford's in Bridgend, where the strategy of the union is really to lobby for the union to join with the employer, with the bosses, to lobby government for intervention and subsidies and so on, and has been a disaster. And I think the contrast with Rolls-Royce, actually, where there's been a strike, and I noticed last week, as the strike meets the crunch point, I mean, I think actually it was a local official who's played quite a good role in the dispute, basically threatened that unless there was action by movement by management over Rolls-Royce and Barnoldswick, they would start to spread it to the rest of the Rolls-Royce plants, which, you know, is the kind of thing we want to see unions start to up the ante around and do more of. And it's obviously perhaps focus the minds with the Rolls-Royce. And that will be an important example. I mean, Mark Porter, the convener, is speaking at the People for Profit National Activist meeting on the 24th. And it's also offered up some, I mean, at one point, there was this brilliant virtual picket line that linked up the strike in Barnoldswick at Rolls-Royce in the private sector over jobs with the fight at Brighton University, also over jobs in the more in the public sector. And you think about how the government, one of its divisions is to try to say, you know, stop moaning in the public sector, you're pampered compared to and all this kind of division compared to the private sector. So to have a united picket line virtually very innovative, very exciting. There's lots of opportunities to make these kind of links, and there's an audience for them. And finally, I think the points that Pete Waters and Kevin Wingfield were making, there is a deep ideological questioning taking place throughout society about questions of racism, slavery, colonialism, about our relationship to nature, about climate change, about how the drive for profit of big agricultural businesses has been one of the things that's fed into the creation of this pandemic and its devastating consequences, and so on. And there's this huge questioning taking place, and that the SWP has to take itself seriously and think there is an audience there. You have to think about how it reaches it. In the first instance, through joint struggle, through united fronts and so on, but also by offering ideological clarity, a place to talk about socialist ideas, and then to enter, as Kevin said, into a systematic, serious, patient discussion with people about joining the SWP. And it doesn't stop there, because we want every member to learn, to grow in confidence, to start leading, and we need to be very, very well organised and very, very serious about it. I think Mike put into the chat a couple of important dates of organising meetings, one in Norwich, one in King's Lynn. Perhaps this will get mentioned a bit more after I've finished, about planning for the March the 20th UN Anti-Racism Day locally. I think if we can get these threads right, we want to be activists, we want more activity, we want to be the best activists, but we also want to be the people who can offer political answers to, I think, huge numbers of people that are bitterly angry about the huge cost of the pandemic, about the devastation of neoliberalism, about austerity, pay freezes, and want to see resistance. And we have much to offer them, and we need them as well, and they need us.